juicing it. Instead, you take it and you press it between two cold stones and squeeze out the juice. And it's just perfect, right? And so they thought, we can capitalize on the craze. And instead of people having to go to the cafe to get their cold-pressed juice, we could provide them the ability to have fresh, cold-pressed juice in their home. And we can make it a subscription service where we make them subscribe to juice, and we will deliver these packets to their home, and they can get one out every morning and put it in their juicero, and it will squeeze them a fresh cup of juice. They raised a whole bunch of money from investors. They hired some of the best industrial designers on the planet, and they spent years developing the most beautiful juicer that you can ever imagine. It looks like something that Apple would create. And guess what? It cost $800 US. This thing was ridiculous. And guess what? When they started to sell them, or trying to sell them, they finally put the product on the market. Guess what happened? People found you could just squeeze the bag. And not only could you squeeze the bag, but you could actually get the juice out of the bag faster, and you could get more juice out of the bag with your bare hands than you could with their $800 machine. So, what was the problem with Juicero? Absolutely, the user experience. But again, they did not understand what their product was. They were trying to make film. They were trying to create something. They were so blinded by this passionate desire to create a machine that they lost sight on what they were trying to do. They were trying to deliver juice. And they completely over-engineered the solution. So, question that I have to you today, another question I have to you today from Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup. He says, what if we found ourselves building something that nobody wanted? In that case, what did it matter if we did it on time or on budget? How many of you work for a tech company? Probably a lot, I'm guessing, because you're in product management and user experience design. How many of you have deadlines? Probably a lot of you. How many of you have budgets you have to work within? Right? But what if you shipped an $800 juicer that nobody bought? They have an entire warehouse full of juicers, and they're now out of business and completely bankrupt. It was a bad mistake. Eric Ries goes on to say, we must learn the truth about which elements of our strategy are working to realize our vision and which are just crazy. We must learn what customers really want, not what they say they want, or even worse, what we think they should want. I love that quote. Make sure that you understand what your business is. So, let's talk a little bit today about product discovery, and I'm going to lead that into job stories and user stories. That's what I want to leave you with today. What is the difference and why it's important? But first we need to understand the process of bringing new products to market. So, I'm sure all of you understand what product delivery is. It's bringing a new product to market. For the rest of this conversation, we'll talk about digital. We'll talk about software. So we're not building juice presses. We're not doing industrial design. We're going to talk about digital software. So in this case, we're not physically building something. We're actually writing code, and we're deploying it. And especially in 2019, in the world of software as a service and the internet, we are shipping this to servers, not on CDs. And so it is writing and deploying code. What is discovery then? What does that mean? Well, discovery is deciding what to build. And I hope that in your heart you didn't just say, well, I don't get to decide. I hope that someone doesn't just tell you what to build, because if they are, they're making a big mistake, and they're very much underutilizing you as a designer and a product manager. Your job as an engineer is to ship as fast as you can. We need to get things out there, right? The business is waiting on it. We figured out what we want. We got to deploy this code. What would be the equivalent of that for discovery? Well, let's take a quick look at what has happened to the industry over the past 2 decades. And this is where, again, in your heart, where I hope it didn't sink just a little bit when I asked you about knowing what to build, is I hope that your stakeholder isn't the one that you're building this for. But I guarantee you there's at least somebody in this room that that's the case. Agile was a lot better than it was back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, where a lot of us were just guessing. But what's even better than that is as we started to improve our process and we started to say, instead of just building what the business wants, is this something that our customers can actually use? Somebody shouted out a few minutes ago about it was a user experience problem, right? Well, we can improve the software that we're using by making sure that it is usable. But there's a difference between usable and useful. And that's where the whole lean movement came in towards the latter half of the last decade. Eric Ries was kind of the godfather of that. And modern software companies started to change their process. And instead of just saying, is this thing usable, they started asking if it was useful. Because just because you can use something and you can use it efficiently doesn't mean you actually get value out of it. Well, the thing I want to talk to you tonight about is that 4th stage of the maturity of software development that our industry is going through. And what we call that is jobs theory, or the jobs to be done framework. Now, I don't want you to get wrapped around the axle around the actual name of this, or that you have to employ a certain framework, because it's really the principles behind it that are important. But and that is, instead of just making it usable or useful, take it to the next level and say, are we actually solving the right problems for our customers? Can you imagine that in your mind, where you think, okay, this thing might be easy to use and it might actually provide value to someone, but what if it doesn't provide value to your customer? Then it's still not good enough. It has to deliver value and solve actual problems for your customers in order for them to pay you for it. And that's how you get a paycheck. Your company has to make money, but the way they make money is by actually solving real problems for customers in a way that they will keep paying for it. So, what we want to do, and as the industry has matured, we have shifted from creating output to delivering outcomes. Your company can ship code all day long. You can high-five each other and celebrate that you shipped your code, but it doesn't matter how many lines of code you shipped or you wrote and how much you delivered if you're not actually producing an outcome, an experience for your customers that they're willing to pay you for. So, what is the equivalent of ship fast? It is to learn fast. What if instead of spending 2 years in stealth mode developing an $800 juicer, Juicero had learned more quickly what their customers wanted and how they could deliver that to really understand the business that they were in? Could have saved a lot of time and a lot of money. So, the old way, this might be the current way, hopefully. Hope some of you are working for more modern organizations that aren't just coming up with ideas and ranking them in a backlog and then building them. Being overconfident that you know your customers, thinking that you're the expert and just plowing ahead. Instead, what you need to be doing is you need to develop deep empathy and knowledge of your customers, and that requires you to talk to them. At Workfront, we ask our teams to talk to our customers or a non-customer at least once a week. You have to be talking to customers and users regularly, or you won't have empathy for them and you won't understand what their challenges are. And so you have to iteratively test those things. Instead of you being the expert, your customers' jobs are the experts, the things that they are trying to do. And I'll explain more what I mean by jobs. I'm not talking about their employment. It's the thing that they're trying to do. And it's being humble enough to admit that we don't know the answer, and that's okay. But we are going to test and research and iterate until we are able to discover the right solution. So what should your process look like? There are a whole bunch. If you Google product development process and do a Google image search for this, or product management or UX process, you're going to see something like this and like this and this. Whole bunch of different ways where you go through strategy, discovery, analysis, where you loop and where you test. You've got the double diamond, all of these different processes. Now, are these bad? They're not. But the thing that is bad is when you hold yourself to these as if they are a holy grail. I know so many people that have a clipboard, and they step through this process and they say, whoa, we can't move forward. We've got to be in the discovery phase for the next 2 weeks. And we got to make sure that we're doing insights, check, and themes, check, and opportunity areas, check. All right, everybody good? Good. We're moving on to the development phase. That's where things go wrong. You know what you really need to do for discovery and to understand these things? It is this simple. You need to build, measure, and learn. And you can throw away all of those other processes that I just skipped through if you just build, measure, and learn. And I like to start with build to make a point. Because you might say, well, what? I'd say, I don't care. Just pick something. Write 3 lines of code. Get it in front of some customers. And see their reaction, and measure that. Learn, and then change it, and tweak it, and then ship it again, and measure that, and learn. And as you go through that process, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take the unknown, the thing that is not concrete. You want to take the abstract, and you want to bring it down to clarity. And so what you're really trying to do is just get from here way over to here. That's the goal. And you can get there in so many ways. And so instead of taking your process and defining it down in such a way that you have to go through this, instead, think about it from the perspective of a toolbox. You have all of these tools in here, and when I build something or when I'm fixing something around the house, I don't use the same tools every time. I don't pick them up in the same order. I use the right tool for the right job. I go in and I assess the job and I look at it and I say, okay, my kids opened the door too fast and they slammed it and the doorknob punched a hole through the wall, right through the sheetrock. It's great. Well, I don't need a drill. What I need is some drywall mud and a putty knife so that I can patch over this. It's a different job to do. I assess the situation, I look at what type of tools I need, and then I employ them. And that's what you need on your team and individually. You need skills and sets of tools And then the maturity of an organization to be able to assess the situation and say, what do we need for this particular job so that we can go and build something and learn from it in the fastest way possible. So let's look at a few other things. This is not what you want. You want this. And you might look at that and say, that doesn't look like a process. How do I want this instead of this? It's because, again, what's most important is not the process, it's the people. It's cross-functional product teams working together. Not engineers on the 4th floor and you're on the 3rd. It's you sitting together, developers, product managers, engineers, and QA, sitting together and working together to discover what you want to build and to deliver it to market. That is what my answer to you as to what your process should be. I'm going to empower you. I'm going to trust you. I'm not going to tell you the steps that you need to take. I'm going to say, you're an expert. You're a professional. You're a UX designer. You're a product manager. Go, figure it out. Go talk to customers and then come back with the things that you learned and with your proposal about how you're going to solve this problem. So we go through a discovery phase and a delivery phase. But here's the issue, is most companies don't work the way I just talked. Most of them have a product manager who does all the discovery, if they do any. Most of them get out Jira and write a bunch of user stories, rank them up and send them to the team. They play poker and assign points to them. Right? And then they get to work and they start writing code and they start shipping stuff. And you got all this delivery. And by the time you get to the end, you've got a Juicero. What we really need, instead of just the customer, the product manager doing that, the designer creating high-fidelity mocks, and just being part of a mechanical process, an assembly line of digital product creation, you need something that looks more like this. We're getting healthier now. We have all 3 disciplines involved. Heaven forbid, an engineer involved in discovery? An engineer on a customer call? Yes, please, please. But is this still right? This does help us to take that abstract and narrow it down to something more concrete. We do have all the right team members involved now, but it's still not right. And the reason for that is because we still have separated the discovery from the delivery. We still have assumed that we're going to figure it out before we start writing code. Here's one of the things I want to share with you tonight. Shipping code or product delivery is one of the best forms of product discovery. There's no better way to figure out if something's right than to ship it and for customers to use it and to get their feedback. So this should really look something more like this. And it's called dual-track agile or dual-track scrum. And you want product discovery and delivery to be happening at the same time. You don't want there to be one waiting on the other and for there to be this cold handoff. But there's still something wrong with this that I don't like either. It's that solid gray line through the middle. It still assumes that you have 2 teams with different priorities that are working in tandem but not working together. What it really should look like is something like this, where you're delivering and learning and delivering and learning, and you take each one of those as feeding back and forth into each other. And if you do that, that's how you can understand truly what your customers' needs are. So that's a lot of ramp up for me to tell you a little bit about what is called continuous discovery. And that is how you properly do product discovery. And it is having the humility to say that we don't know what the solution is, but we're going to figure that out by getting started. The very best way that you can figure it out and come up with an answer to what your business should be and what solution you want to solve for your customers is to get started. So I got a wonderful quote here from a lady named Susie Prince. She says, "The main reason I love to deliver continuously is to get product feedback and validation sooner. The moment a new product or feature gets delivered to your customers, you start to get real feedback. Yes, there are a bunch of things you can do to test ideas before with interviews, mock-ups, prototypes, and user tests, and you should do those things." She says, "I love these, and I'm not advocating just building it and hoping customers come." She says, "But there is nothing like the rubber hits the road feedback you get, having pushed a new feature to production, to really learn if it achieves what you hoped it would or not." I'll give you a very real experience that we just had at Workfront. We have been working on a major user experience redesign to our core platform. We have been in business for 18 years now. Workfront was founded in 2001, and this is there have been some adjustments to the product over the years, but this is the most significant change to the product since the product was started 18 years ago. A complete overhaul of the experience. And just last week, I started to use the product for real data, my real work in the product. And we have taken everyone inside of our company in, and we are started eating our own dog food, if you're familiar with that phrase, to use our own tool. And in another week, we are going to bring on 26 of our customers to start using this in a closed alpha test. It's the most wonderful thing that Workfront has ever done, and it is a new world for Workfront to be able to use these products to be able to deliver products in the way that she has described here. These are ways that we are changing and maturing as an organization to work this way. So a lot of companies out there are getting better. They're starting to think this way and to prioritize product discovery. But here's where we're still missing the mark just a little bit. Sometimes they are still thinking too much about output, and they're not defining success criteria enough. When I talked about that build, measure, learn loop, if you're going to measure something, you have to figure out what that's going to be. You need to baseline that first, and you need to have a process of recording those results. And then you have to have the courage to do something about it. I can't tell you how many companies out there that I've talked to or that I have coached or trained that pat themselves on the back because they're so excited because they're running a test, and then they get the results back, and then they talk about what worked and what didn't, and then they keep doing the same thing, or they just leave it in production. And they high-five each other and they go out for drinks because they're so excited that they learned something. But what good is it if you learn something if you didn't do anything about it? You've got to change something in your product. Ship it again, learn again, and change it again. So, moving on. This is how I recommend you work, and this is where we get to user stories. I have something that I call the project brief. And this is how you as a team can figure out what it is you should be working on each week, each couple of weeks, and you can then build, measure, and learn. And that is starting with an assumption. Asking each other, what problem are we solving and why? If someone at your company has just come to you and told you, go build widget X, you're probably not going to succeed, and it probably won't be right. And if somebody does, the first thing you should do is you should push back, and you should say, why? For whom? And what is the outcome that we want them to have, or what is the experience we want them to have by building widget X? You should be able to answer that problem. What problem are we or that question? What problem are we solving and why? Then we write job stories, which I'll describe more in a moment. What value will it deliver to the customers, and what will it enable them to do? And then you write a hypothesis or a series of hypotheses that indicate what you think will happen and how you will measure those items, coming up with quantitative metrics that will indicate whether it was a positive or a negative. Then you decide what you're going to do. You might not even build something new. You might even run a test against your existing product, but just by tweaking something in it. Or you might just use a prototype. You might even, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but I even went through an exercise one time where we did the entire thing through pantomime to communicate an experience. We were designing something for an ATM, and we had somebody pretend they were the ATM, and somebody came up and pretended to push a button, and the person spoke what was going to be on the screen. Insert your credit card, and the person pretended to insert their credit card. On the screen, you now have two options, A and B. The person pretends to push A. There are so many creative ways that you can prototype something. You've probably heard of paper prototypes. There's so many different ways that you can do this. You want to be as lean and as simple as you possibly can to learn as fast as you possibly can. And then in the end, what were the results and what did we learn? So literally, I have a template that I like to use that has each of these items with blanks on it. And when I'm leading a team to do this, I have them fill this out. Today, instead of writing it on paper, our teams that are following this model do it in a wiki. We use a tool called Notion, and they go in and they should be writing an assumption. They should be writing user stories. And after they learn, they should be going back and recording the results. So, how do you write an assumption? Doesn't have to be exactly this way. This is just a template that I would recommend to help you, filling in the blanks, something like this. Our product was designed to achieve these goals. We've observed that our product isn't meeting these goals in the marketplace, which is causing adverse effects to our business. How might we improve our product so that our customers are more successful? Something like this, right? Then, we want to write job stories. Job stories take this form. When this, I want to be able to X so that I can Y. Now, once we've done that, we write a hypothesis. We believe that blank. We believe that our customers will sign up more, or we believe our customers will use our product feature more, or whatever it may be. We will know that we were right or wrong when we see the following feedback from the market. How many of you on your team right now have an actual number that you're tracking against? We have a number at Workfront that's a big one we're trying to change. It's a 3-year goal to change our weekly active users. But what about just today, right now, this week, this sprint? What are you trying to do this sprint? Just write code? Go home? Yay? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to change? What effect will it have? If you don't know that, you're not going to be as successful as you possibly can be. You need to move numbers. So then we build it, and then we take the results afterwards. What did we learn? What results do we see? What are we going to do about it? So let's talk then now about the difference between job stories and user stories. Who's familiar with user stories? Yeah? Who's familiar with job stories? A lot less. Got a big hand back here. So my goal today is just quickly to tell you the difference. First of all, you might say, what about personas? Who uses personas? I'm about to bag on personas. Buckle up. So, on the right, we have a persona. And the question that I'll ask you today is, why did Peter buy a Snickers? I mean, who wouldn't? Snickers are really good, right? Do you think Peter bought a Snickers because he's 35 years old, has a degree in marketing? No. Is it because he has an active lifestyle, 2 dogs, hangs out at Jack in the Box, and eats at Taco Bell, and that he stubbed his toe yesterday? I'm being a little funny with the stubbed his toe, but who's written a persona that looks, come on, be honest, a little like that? I have. I'm willing to admit it. I've written a lot of them. It was quite a few years ago, though, because I stopped writing them. You know why Peter bought a Snickers? To satisfy his hunger. And it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. So, one of the big reasons that personas, I'm sure each one of you have something that looks just like this. The reason that they fail is because generally they are centered around marketing. They're how you can sell things to customers, not how you can solve problems for them. And we get way too caught up in demographics. He's a Republican, and he lives in New Jersey, and he has 3 dogs, and most of that stuff doesn't matter. What really matters is what that person is trying to do, and that's what we call a job. Okay? So, how about user stories? Now, I'm going to say how user stories fail, but user stories actually do have a job, and I'll talk about the difference between the two here in just a moment. But we have a big assumption, right? Customers don't know what they want. Who's heard that before? In UX, in product, we say it all the time. Customers don't know what they want. You can't just ask a customer what they want, because if you ask them what they want, there's the apocryphal attribution to Henry Ford that he said, faster horses, right? And instead of faster horses, he didn't listen to the market, and he invented the Model T. The rest of the story is history, that we all have automobiles. And what's my dream car? Is it a Nada? Niva? A white Niva. I want one so bad. Oh, I think they're awesome. Where's my what? Sorry, I still didn't. Oh, my time? I just think it's a cool car. So I'm going to get one shipped to the United States. That's what I want to do. Okay. So customers don't know what the solution is. That's true. And if we asked a customer, what should we build? They can't tell you that. And we should not ask them that. But guess what customers do know and are the expert in? Do you remember when I said the old way and the new way? One of the items under the column, in the column of the new way, was instead of we're the experts, over here it was the customer's jobs are the experts. That's what I'm talking about right here. Customers absolutely are the utmost or foremost authority on what they want to get done. They know what they want to get done, and they know what they need to get done. They know what they need to accomplish. But the problem is they express their needs in a different way that we assume that they would. It's through solutions and ideas that they can see today. So we don't ask them for that because they only have the context. We were talking about this at work today too, Arson. We were talking about how customers might be looking at something in your product today and they're going to say, it's great, I love it, don't take it away from me. Because they don't know about a world that's better. Go back in time to 2005 and ask a BlackBerry user how awesome their BlackBerry was. They're going to tell you that it was amazing. And if you ask them if you could take it away from them, they'd say, absolutely not. But what if you had a time machine and handed them an iPhone? You'd blow their mind, and they'd throw their BlackBerry on the floor, right? So they have no idea because they can't see the future like you can. So people encounter situations that drive the need to accomplish a job. They hire, that's why we call them jobs, they hire a product or a service to get the job done. It's like you hiring a mechanic, or you hiring this photographer back here that still uses old film. He's probably creates most beautiful photos. You hire them to photograph your wedding. The job, not the customer, is the fundamental unit of analysis. And what that means is as you are building, measuring, and learning, it's the job that you're watching, okay? So, before you can determine what solution they'll want, you need to figure out what jobs they're trying to get done and what metrics define success for that. So if your customer is trying to get juice, or they're trying to capture memories, whatever it may be, what are the metrics that determine if they're successful? And I'm not talking about what are the metrics for your product. There's a huge difference. It's not weekly active users. It's not new sign-ups. It's not anything. All of those, it's not revenue. Those are all your metrics or your business's metrics. What are your customers' jobs metrics? At Workfront, we have customers that are trying to prioritize work. Why? So that they can spend the right time on the right activities. What's the metric for them that determines whether they were successful? That's what you need to answer. So, what is the anatomy of a user story? Something that most people in tech are familiar with. And most of you probably have a tool like Jira that is full of user stories. Well, something like this. As a mobile user, I want a longer antenna so that I can have better reception. How many of you in QA have seen one of those? Hundreds of them probably, right? You're testing the product, and you have to go through, and you have to go through every single user story, and you have to make sure that the product actually solved the problem. Did we build it according to spec? Check, 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 check. Right? What's wrong with that? Early assumptions. How do you know that that's what they want? And how do you know that's the right solution? Instead, look down here at this job story. A job story says, when I'm calling a friend, I want to minimize the likelihood that the conversation drops. Notice how it had nothing to do with antennas? What if an antenna isn't the right way to solve it? What if you could have the same antenna, but it could be on a 5G network, which has a stronger signal and actually goes through buildings better, which it actually doesn't. 5G doesn't go through buildings better, but you get the point. That may not, the longer antenna may not be the solution. Really, they want to minimize the call dropping. So, what we want is we need an outcome, and we need a way to measure that. So, going farther, how many of you guys have boards like this? Probably a lot of you, where you have stories that you're moving across the board. So, what's interesting here is, notice how there are two things on here, job stories on the left and user stories on the right. I'm not advocating necessarily that one replaces the other. I wanted to show you this here. It was way farther than I thought it was. Okay, just spoiled. Okay, backing up. Okay, so a user story. As a blank, I want to blank so that I can something. How many have written one of those? Oh yeah, everybody's written one of these. Well, what's the problem here? Well, that first part is generally a persona. Right? And we just talked about how personas aren't very helpful. That next part is an action that most of us just make up. Your PM probably wrote it for you. And lastly, an outcome, again, that we probably just made up. That, first of all, the persona is usually irrelevant. And how do we know that that action is the best action to take? Have we tested that? Have we researched that? Have we talked to the customer? There are way, way too many assumptions. So if you are using a user story after discovery is done just to communicate what to be built, fine. I don't have any problem with that. But if you're using a user story to figure out what you should build, it is way, way too dangerous. Many of you probably have something that looks like this, again, in a spreadsheet or in Jira, where you have something like, as a moderator, I want to create a new game by entering a name and an optional description so that I can start inviting estimators. And it goes on and on and on. As a moderator, as an estimator, so that I can, right? Well, look at the difference here. I just took the first one off the top of that list. As a moderator, I want to create a new game by entering a name and an optional description, versus a job story that says something like this. I want to create a new game by entering a name and an optional description. The only difference is I just lopped off that first part. Do you feel like it's any weaker? Do you think that it's any different? Or another way to say it is, did it provide any value to say as a moderator? Does it really matter that that person's a moderator? No. Instead, what if you wrote it this way? When I'm ready to have estimators bid on my game, I want to create a game in a format that estimators can understand, so the estimators can find my game and know what they are about to bid on. Do you see how that opens you up to so many more opportunities to really to even just be creative, to come up with a solution, opposed to the first one where the solution is already defined for you? Because if you're working underneath that first one, you're kind of just a robot. You're just on an assembly line, just cranking stuff out. Here's another example. As an estimator, I want to see the item we're estimating so that I know what I'm giving an estimate for. Or, when I find an item I want to set an estimate for, I want to be able to see it so that I can confirm the item I'm estimating is actually the correct one. Do you see the why in that, opposed to just a cold, a hollow action? All right, I'm going to skip that next example. So let's look at job stories now and how they compare to the user story in terms of the template. It's a situation instead of a persona. It's a motivation instead of an action. Because the action could be one of many things. We want to talk about what's motivating them to do something, and then the outcome that they will achieve. So, the job story encourages the product design process to focus on context, causality, and motivations instead of just assumptions, subjectivity, personas, and implementation. You should not be thinking about the way that it's going to be built at this stage. You should be having this green field of creativity. You know, I don't know how much this debate has raged on here in Yerevan, but in the United States, there are a lot of people for many years that have debated inside of the design space of, should designers code? Have you guys had that argument here? Oh, designers have to be able to code. They should know HTML. No, they shouldn't. It doesn't matter. Oh, and it goes on and on and on and on. Here's the definitive answer. You ready? Absolutely knowing how to code will make you a better designer. But should you be required to code? No. But here's something that I'll share with you. Earlier on in my career, I did both simultaneously. And I was a worse designer for it. And the reason is because I had one foot in both. And I was trying to do both at the same time. And guess what? I sacrificed one for the other. Now, it shifted back and forth. There were times when I favored design because it was convenient. And there were other times when I favored engineering because it was convenient. And I'll tell you what, there are times when I sacrificed the design and I made it less beautiful and less useful and less usable because I didn't want to code that. Because it's going to be harder to do. I'll just do it the easier way because I know I'm going to have to code it. But guess what? If they have to code it, then I'm not worried about that. I'm going to design what's right. Now, am I saying that you shouldn't have a consideration for the technological constraints? Absolutely not. You should be talking about it. But you can't have that honest dialogue with yourself. Thanks for a little digression there. But so, We're in the home stretch here with job stories. Start with the high-level job. Then identify smaller jobs that you can break it down into, and then observe how people are trying to solve that problem today. You should be talking to customers and potential customers regularly. Go do contextual inquiry. Sit down next to the people and watch how they're compensating for it today. This is my favorite research method, is to be able to see the sticky note or see the hack that they are doing to get their work done. That is your gold mine for how you can invent new successful solutions. And then come up with these job stories and investigate the causality, the anxieties, and the motivations around them. Taking a little bit further here, I'm going to skip those two slides. It makes you think about motivation and context and keeps you in the right frame of mind. This is why job stories are so much better than user stories are, is because you have not skipped forward to the assumption and the solution so quickly. All right, so what makes a good job story? You want to refine the situation and add context to it. So here, I've got one last example for you. When I want something to eat, that's your situation. How could we make that better? How could we expand that? When I'm in a rush and I want something to eat. Because everybody wants something to eat pretty much all the time, right? But if you were trying to solve a job for a customer and you now had the job you were trying to solve is when they're in a rush, that changes things quite a bit, right? Because if I'm in a rush, I don't have time to bake and spend an hour and a half in the kitchen. How about this? When I'm in a rush, I'm starving and I want something to eat. Or when I'm in a rush, starving, need something to eat that I can eat with one hand on the go, and I'm not sure when the next time I'll be able to eat. We're getting really specific now, right? So, what is the solution? Pizza! Everybody, right? So, we are now shaping a solution to fit the situation or the job. This will lead you to the right outcomes. So, again, one of the key factors of success here is that job stories come from real people, not personas. Now, I'm sure there's some of you in the room that have labored and produced the most amazing personas that would argue with me and say, but they're based on real people. I went and interviewed customers. But I'm willing to bet that your persona is not based on a single person. Basically, the definition of a persona is that it is an archetype that represents a group of people, right? So it really doesn't represent a real person because it can't, because you've taken all of this data about a whole bunch of different people and you've merged it together into this single monster that isn't even real anymore. So go and talk to real customers and real potential customers and write a job story about what they are trying to do. And personas, again, are, as I described, that mashup. What you really want to do is instead, you want to make sure that it is directly tied to things that you have observed them doing and not demographic information. Again, way too many times, personas and even user stories are based off of attributes that have nothing to do with the customer's trying to do. Like the examples I gave earlier, like their age, or where they live, or how many dogs they have. An example I like to use all the time is our president in the United States, Donald Trump, who is a prolific tweeter. I'm sure you've heard in the news all of the crazy things that he tweets about. Do you think there's any difference between a 14-year-old girl using Twitter and Donald Trump using Twitter? Not much. They're both trying to do the same thing, you know, look good in front of their friends, or tick off leaders of other nations. But it really doesn't matter that he's male and she's female, or that he's 70-something and she's 14. They're both trying to do the same job. So, job stories start with a vague when. Here's a few other examples. When I'm hungry, when I'm lost, when I want to check mail. Oh, sorry. They shouldn't start with a vague when. When they do, they're not as helpful. So instead of just a vague when, those they don't sufficiently illustrate a struggling moment. So don't just say when I'm hungry or when I'm lost or when I want to check my email. Instead, you want to say something like this: when I'm hungry, running late to get somewhere, and not sure when I'm going to eat, right? The example I gave you before. The more specific you can be, the better it will be. When I'm lost in a city that I've never been to, I don't know the local language, and I'm worried that I'll be wasting my time in places I don't want to be in. See the difference there? I was talking to my team last night and today about what words I know in Armenian. They were trying to quiz me, and it turns out that the only words I know in Armenian are food words. That's what's most important. So I was just thinking, when I'm lost in a city that I've never been to, don't know the local language, all I say is lavash or gata. It's all I need, and I'm taken care of. The wisdom that you get from understanding a customer's pain is never something you need to backpedal on. It is never something you need to pivot on. That's irrefutable knowledge. And the last thing I'll leave with you today is the only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else. It's not to ship faster. It's not to be first to market. It is to learn faster than anyone else. And I promise you, if you do that, you'll be wildly successful. Yeah. Thank you.
Never mind. Wait, we can do like this Q&A. If you have questions, you want to skip the slide? We can do both.
So we got one there. What are key success factors for UX designer?
The key success.
Is that from tonight?
Yeah.
I don't know if the person who asked it would let me ask a clarifying question or if you want to remain anonymous, but I was wondering if you meant like on a specific project or if you mean for them in their career is the first thing that I thought of. But success factors for a designer, your job is to make sure that you are solving a problem that is a real actual problem for a user. And the key metrics that I would give for you is making sure that it is something that can be measured. Too often designers feel like they are special in that they're above the part of the business, that the PM's responsible for monetization, responsible for P&L, and I just get to draw pictures. If that's the case, you have absolutely misunderstood your role, and if that's how your business sees you, they are underutilizing you. Every single designer's job should be attached to numbers. Just as much as engineers are responsible for, held accountable for delivery dates, and product managers are responsible for the dollars that come from selling the product, you should be responsible for metrics that you move, and you should be tracking it. So the number one thing that I would give you in terms of success factors is, what have you delivered? What is the outcome? Not the output, but what is the outcome that you have caused for customers that your business is trying to serve? And I would challenge you, can you prove that with numbers? And you should be able to. You as your team should have specific numbers that you're tracking, and you should be able to show. Did I just go to sleep? You should be able to show whether you have had a positive outcome for the use inside of your product. Wow, there we go. What is the main difference of a UX and a product manager's responsibilities? That's another great one. So I believe very, very strongly in a tight relationship between a product manager and a designer. I've used the metaphor of a marriage very often. And there are people that probably laugh at that and think that it's funny. We've even, some friends and I, we've often called it our work spouse. And I think it's a good metaphor, because in a marriage, the two of you are greater than the sum of the parts. And you each bring something to that relationship that's very unique. You're not the same, and you shouldn't be. And so, if you have a Venn diagram between PM and UX, there should be some good overlap. You both should be very, very interested in discovering the job that your customer is trying to do and delivering a successful outcome. Now, over on the other sides of that Venn diagram, the things that's different between a product manager is the product manager is responsible for delivering that to market and the monetization of that, making sure that it's something that the company can sell. You, on the other hand, the designer, on the other hand, sorry, I was assuming it was a designer was asking, but it may not have been. The designer, on the other hand, is responsible for making sure that it is usable and useful, and that the experience is successful. So designers, generally UX designers have a wide range of skills. As a company gets larger and matures, you can specialize more and more, and you may have UX individuals who focus just on research, ones that focus more on interaction design, and others that focus more just on visual design. But their responsibility is taking that job story and then taking the idea that the team comes up with and prototyping, mocking things up, running usability tests, doing contextual inquiry with the product manager, and then designing the interface. Whereas the product manager's responsibility generally is communicating with customers, helping the team to prioritize the work that they are going to do, running customer calls and research calls, running the synthesis of information that comes from the research, and helping the team then to figure out what the next steps should be. They're also the liaison with engineering to make sure that they're on track and removing impediments. Some larger organizations have scrum masters or project managers, but I'd say a lot of times when you get to the stage where you need to start adding people in like that, your team's probably too big. And I didn't say your company's too big, your team is probably too big. Generally, with a product manager and a designer on a 2-pizza-sized team, you don't need that extra role in there. You need my finger? Sorry, I don't know how to keep it awake while we're... How to explain the importance of jobs to PMs and other interested parties so they understand the process and don't stick to old ways that aren't optimal? Ah, yes. How do you take this amazing feeling that you have right now and go and sell it to everyone else? I have had this question probably more than any question at the end of any talk that I have given. How do I take what you just sold me and what I am so excited about, and I go and get my business, my boss, my coworkers to do this. And the number one thing that I've told you, the number one advice that I've given to people is go and do it, and then show the results. I've preached a lot about numbers and metrics tonight. Numbers mean everything. I promise you that your business, your executives, people, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about results. Money talks, results talk, numbers talk. So don't ask for permission. Go and do it. I'm sure you've got some time where you could sneak this in. If you don't, do it on your lunch break. Do it one of the nights this week and go and try it. Go and find a customer to talk to and then go and write your own job story and then bring it to the team and show them the difference. Instead of just trying to just teach it to them or preach it to them through the theory and the academics, show them an actual example. Take something that you're working on and then come back to your product manager or to your business and say, look what I learned. I used this method called jobs theory, and I went and I did some research, and then I wrote this story, and then I created this prototype, and I went and tested it. I had this idea that this thing in our product or this thing that we're doing today isn't quite right. I know, blasphemy, we're working on it, and I doubted. But I didn't think that it was right. Like, I had this idea that it could be better. And so I just went and I tried this, and I tested it, and guess what? And I measured the test. And our current way, only 3 out of 20 people were doing it right. But guess what? My way, 12 out of 20 people did it. And that person's going to say, oh, really? Well, let me see it. So that is my advice to you, is go and do it. That is the very best way that you will be able to convince people. What's the most effective way to communicate communicating with customers? Do you mean like whether it's on the phone or through like video chat? Or do you mean like maintaining updates or publishing communications out to people? Is anybody willing to say who asked the question? Nope. Okay. We use Zoom video conferencing for most of our customer calls, and that's just because, first of all, for our team here in Armenia, we don't have, unfortunately, a single customer in Armenia, and so for all of our employees here, they have to use Zoom to talk to customers. But they don't have to use Zoom to talk to potential customers. I was just talking to one of our product managers about this morning, is just because we don't have a single customer in Armenia is absolutely no excuse that you can't talk to someone and test something with someone. Because guess what? There's a lot of people in here that match our customers. A lot of people here in Armenia. In fact, even in this room, you all work in tech. You all sit at a computer all day. I'm willing to bet everyone in this room's got a laptop, right? You all do work. You all have to prioritize your work. You all have deadlines and assignments. You all have colleagues you need to communicate with. You need to give updates to. Well, guess what? That's what Workfront helps you do. And so, we should be talking to you. We should be inviting you over to our office, feeding you lunch, showing you our prototype, and running tests with you. And you should be doing the same thing with us for your product. And so, that in person is absolutely the very best way to communicate with customers. The more you can see them face to face, you can do a customer discovery call, you can do contextual inquiry, you can go and sit down next to someone and watch how they're doing it, is the very best way that you can communicate with customers. Sorry. Any other questions? I think that was all of them on the list, right? Oh, there were more? Okay. Is it challenging to manage remote teams? Yes. It is a big challenge. But what's more challenging than remote teams is time zones. Time zone is the biggest challenge. And I'll tell you, Our team members will tell you that that is one of the cases. We're almost on the complete other side of the planet in Salt Lake City. It's far away, and so I wouldn't say it's a challenge to manage them, because these are amazing, talented people, and so it's not the issue of managing them. It's just the issue of us collaborating together. Where we used to have a team in Poland too. Unfortunately, we shut down that group just a month ago. But we used to have people in Salt Lake City and in Poland and in Armenia, and yeah, it's a lot of work. The distance is a challenge, but it's worth it here because we have such amazing designers here and engineers. Sorry, the designers report to me, so I'm going to talk about design. But we have 100 employees here in Yerevan. We have an amazing group that's doing amazing work. And yes, as Sona said, we're hiring, so please come talk to us. But it is a challenge. One of the ways that we deal with that, in addition to have video conferencing calls, is we use our own product to upload videos into Workfront that we are able to use to communicate with each other, to provide updates. We have design critiques weekly, and then we summarize those critiques in a video with the team, and we upload it. And it allows us to see each other's faces each week and to hear each other's voices. And that's really important for bridging the distance, so that we can stay in touch with each other and feel the connection and have the team camaraderie. Just think of if there's any other tips I can give you for working with a remote team. You have to have clearly defined communication channels. This is how we're going to communicate and when we're going to communicate. You also have to be very proactive about speaking up. You can't just wait around for someone to drop by your desk or when you might run into somebody in the hallway because you're not in the same office. If there's a question that you have to speak up. You can't wait. And I think my laptop says we're done. I don't know why it's not coming back. There we go. Thanks for being so patient. I hope this has been helpful for you tonight. So in the case of the juice company, should they have made the product so hard that users wouldn't be able to use a shortcut and squeeze the juice with their hands? No. Absolutely not. That I feel pretty confident that would have failed. Because if they had somehow manufactured the juice bags with spikes on them, so you wouldn't have squeezed them, and you would have had to use their proprietary machine, people would have worked around it. I mean, just look at the innovation. Look at the internet. At how much. The creative solutions that people come up with. You can't stop innovation like that. You have to embrace the path of least resistance, and you have to engineer or innovate to support that, not trying to stop people. There are ample examples throughout history of when companies have gone above and beyond to put obstacles in the way of something, or to make things illegal, or whatever, to prevent somebody from doing it. And a good example was DRM, digital rights management, on music. If you remember in the early days when people were starting to share MP3s around the internet, and the music companies were freaking out because nobody's going to buy music anymore. But guess what? People were actually happy to pay for music. They just wanted it easy. And the music companies were so old school and old fashioned that they were so afraid that the internet and this new technology model was going to put them out of business that they stuck their head in the sand and tried to pretend it wasn't there, and they tried to legislate and put laws around downloading an MP3 to make it illegal, and that you couldn't share it because it had this digital rights management baked into it. And Apple finally, with the weight that they had behind the iPod and everything, they finally, I mean, it was amazing when Steve Jobs took a stance. Do you guys remember when he published an open letter to the music industry, and they published it on apple.com on the front page of their website, where he basically ripped the music industry a new one, and he said, you know what? Digital rights management is not how this is going to succeed. We are going to fight against this. And finally, they removed it all from their platform, and they said, you know, we're not going to do this anymore. And guess what? The music companies didn't go out of business. Now today we've actually shifted to a streaming model. Very many people buy individual songs or albums anymore, but they're still making money. And it's because you've got to provide a way that people want to consume it instead of stopping it. Sorry, that was like way off on a tangent, or whoever was asking about Juicero, but no, shouldn't try to stop it. You should get out in front of it and embrace it. You want me to keep going? Have you noticed, if any, differences in working culture here in Armenia working with our local team in Utah? Yes, there's a lot of cultural differences. Most of them are good for us, though. That's one of the reasons that we love having a distributed team. It provides great diversity. I'll tell you one thing that I love about the Armenian market is there are so many women that are working here. Over 50% of the UX design team are female, and it is awesome. And a good chunk of those are here in Armenia. I wonder if there's some examples I could give you off the top of my head about cultural differences. Too many? There's definitely differences with Armenians than people in the U.S. around how we approach conflict and how we speak our mind, how maybe bold we are. What other differences? I feel like Armenian, this is kind of funny. It's like it's like a therapy session here, and I feel like I'm judging the whole country. I feel like most the Armenians that I know care very deeply, more than a lot of our U.S. counterparts, about finishing a project, like more willing to work on it longer, to refine it and keep going more and more and more, whereas the other members of our team are trying to wrap it up faster, and they're feeling a different motivation, I guess is the way I would describe it. Is I feel like our U.S. counterparts are more trying to get to the end faster, where the Armenian team members are looking for the quality and wanting to refine it more. Does that make sense? So I don't know if that resonates with anyone, but that's something that I have felt a difference between our team members is wanting to keep going on it deeper, pushing it farther, keep refining it, exploring more solutions, and going deeper and deeper. That's a big cultural difference that I've sensed with our designers. There you go.
So thank you one more time, and let's enjoy the meal and socialize.